To Tucker Carlson tonight. I'm Mark Stein, filling in for Tucker while he vacations with his family. President Trump's aggressive rhetoric toward North Korea, vowing fire and fury if Kim Jong-un's regime goes too far, was bashed by many people in Washington. If they hope to change the president's behavior, they clearly don't understand him. Today, Trump said his only regret was that he may not have been tough enough.
Frankly, the people that were questioning that statement, was it too tough? Maybe it wasn't tough enough. They've been doing this to our country for a long time, for many years. And it's about time that somebody stuck up for the people of this country and for the people of other countries. So, if anything, maybe that statement wasn't tough enough. And we're backed by 100% by our military. We're backed by everybody, and we're backed by many other leaders. North Korea better get their act together, or they're going to be in trouble like few nations ever have been in trouble in this world. We are preparing for many different alternative events at North Korea. He has disrespected our country greatly. He has said things that are horrific. And with me, he's not getting away with it. He got away with it for a long time between him and his family. He's not getting away with it. It's a whole new ballgame. He does something in Guam, it will be an event the likes of which nobody's seen before, what will happen in North Korea. That's not a dare, as you say. That is a statement of fact.
Yeah, and just to be clear, North Korea is pledging to fire 4 missiles around Guam, north, south, east and west. Rebecca Heinrichs is a fellow at the Hudson Institute. David Tafuri is a former State Department official. They both join us. David, first to you. There are really two views on this. One is that the big problem is that North Korea is threatening to fire 4 missiles at Guam, and for a whole bunch of other people, the problem is the president's rhetoric. What to you is the big burning issue here?
Well, absolutely. North Korea is the problem, and make no mistake about it, North Korea's leader is erratic, he's a war criminal, and he's very dangerous, and it's appropriate for us to make sure he knows that we will use overwhelming force if he does anything to strike out against America, America's interests, or American allies. But President Trump's initial response on Tuesday was very simplistic. He almost stooped to the North Korean leader's level, and that also is a problem. Let's take what Secretary of Defense Mattis said yesterday to clean that up. Here was his statement. He said, the combined allied militaries now possess the most precise, rehearsed, and robust defensive and offensive capabilities on Earth. That sounds presidential. President Trump did not sound presidential when he basically said, I'm going to send fireballs of fury at North Korea.
Rebecca, sounding presidential here means you put on a boring expression and say bloodless things like all options remain on the table. That's got us to where we are after 24 years of that.
That's exactly right. That's the take that President Obama took, and obviously it didn't work. What President Trump is trying to do is change the calculus of Kim Jong-un. He's trying to make sure that he understands that if Kim Jong-un believes that he can threaten the United States with a nuclear ballistic missile, that it will not be worth the cost. And he's trying to make that threat credible. And I think he better believe him. The reason the American people are feeling a little bit uncomfortable is because they know that President Trump might do it. That's the point. The whole point is to deter war, and in order to do that, you have to make sure that the enemy understands you mean it, you're serious, you're going to back up these threats.
Yeah, David, isn't that a fair point? We've been as predictable in the sense that the court eunuch is predictable. You know he can't do anything and he's not going to do anything. We have Susan Rice saying basically now we need to just get used to North Korea being a nuclear power. Isn't that an incredible thing for the so-called National Security Advisor of the United States during the Obama years to say now she's out of office?
Well, you know, I don't agree with that statement by Susan Rice, but that also was not the policy of President Obama. And if you look at the policies of President Clinton, a Democrat, then President Bush, a Republican, then President Obama, a Democrat, and now President Trump, they're really all not all that different. They're pretty much the same. It's a mix of military and keeping the military options on the table and using diplomacy. And that's appropriate. And it's appropriate now, given that North Korea is getting closer to weaponizing its nuclear weapons, that we need to have stronger language. But we need to do it an appropriate way, and we need to be creative about it. And we need to consider. We need to have carrots and sticks.
We don't need stronger language. We need to stop basket case psycho states nuclearizing. North Korea has shared its nuclear technology with Iran. Iran has said it wants to share its nuclear technology with Sudan. I don't know where you go below Sudan, but when Sudan becomes nuclear, I guess they'll be sharing it with Somalia, and Somalis with machetes will instead be Somalis with nukes. Where's this going to go, Rebecca?
Well, you know, Susan Rice's op-ed in the New York Times, as you see, she essentially says that we can deal with a nuclear North Korea, certainly explains why the Obama policy was to look the other way. Remember, in 2013, in an open hearing in the House Armed Services Committee, it was revealed that the Pentagon understood that North Korea likely does have a miniaturized nuclear weapon that they can put on a missile. And what did the Obama administration do when that revelation came to light? They looked the other way, they downplayed the intelligence and acted like it, you know, really wasn't as serious as it was. We have punted on this. We cannot allow Kim Jong-un to essentially have a nuclear gun to the head of the American people. President Trump isn't going to allow it. He's going to improve our missile defense systems, which, oh, by the way, President Obama cut them by almost $1 billion, our homeland missile defense system, his first couple of years in office. We are behind. The system can protect the 50 states of the United States, but it's not sufficient. We've got to get better. We've got to put the squeeze on Kim Jong-un. Remember, we're not preventing a nuclear ICBM at this point. We've got to roll it back, and we've got to stop Kim Jong-un.
Speaking of prevention, David, do you think if he decides to go ahead with this kind of Radio City aquacades around sovereign U.S. territory in Guam with these 4 missiles, we should let him do it?
No, absolutely not. We can't let him do anything. We cannot let him have nuclear weapons.
So what do we do?
He has.
But what we have to do is we have to push back with military options, make it clear that we're going to use our military and use military strikes, and we might even use offensive strikes, and we'll certainly use defensive strikes. But at the same time, we have to ratchet up sanctions, which we're doing, and I give President Trump credit for, and Nikki Haley for taking the lead in the UN and passing sanctions. But remember, that's the same thing President Obama did. He passed sanctions in November against North Korea, too. Rebecca likes to make this political. It's not political. Mainstream Democrats and mainstream Republicans agree on the response. It's be forceful with our military, use it if we have to, but try to pressure North Korea using China and using Russia and using our allies to come to the table and have a diplomatic resolution. That's the only way to do this.
Okay, Rebecca, David seems to be saying it's, you know, they're both parties have been useless on this. Is Trump any different?
I think both parties have failed to stop North Korea. That's absolutely right. But it was Barack Obama that punted this when North Korea was on the brink of having a credible nuclear ICBM. So, and Susan Rice's op-ed again in the New York Times proves that their policy of strategic patience was essentially to allow Kim Jong-un to get this capability. But I do think that President Trump is doing something different. He is saying, I'm serious. This is credible. I'm prepared to make sure that if given the choice of war on the Korean Peninsula or allowing the American people to be hostage to a nuclear ICBM, I'm choosing the former.
Okay.
That is to deter Kim Jong-un from doing something he's going to regret.
Every president has said that.
We'll have to leave it. We'll have to leave it there. The fire and fury of cable news panels. Rebecca and David, thank you very much. The saga of Benghazi is not over. 5 years on, the State Department is still dragging its feet on releasing emails related to the murder of 4 U.S. citizens on that dark night. Today, U.S. District Court Judge Amit Mehta, an Obama appointee, ruled that the State Department hasn't looked hard enough for Benghazi-related emails sent to or from Hillary Clinton and ordered a new, wider search. Ramona Kotkar is a senior attorney at Judicial Watch, and they sued the State Department for the emails, and Ramona joins us now. It's 5 years on from September 2012. Why has this taken so long, Ramona?
Well, it's taken so long because the State Department is refusing to meet its obligations under the Freedom of Information Act. We had filed this case over 2 years ago. We asked for all of Secretary Clinton's emails related to Benghazi and to the attacks in Benghazi. And while the State Department did search the records that were returned by Secretary Clinton and her most senior officials, they refused to search the most obvious place, which would be the State Department's own server. It patently refused to do so. It its position in court was that it would be fruitless to search the State Department email accounts of her senior advisors, Huma Abedin, Jacob Sullivan, and Cheryl Mills, her most trusted senior aides while she was the Secretary of State.
Well, why is the State Department, Hillary's been out of the State Department now for 4 years, 4.5 years. Why is there still institutional support for obstructing freedom of information on her behalf? In other words, why is the Trump State Department protecting Hillary Clinton?
Well, I don't know why the current State Department is protecting Hillary Clinton, but we know that this has been a drip, drip, drip sort of saga because the process by which the record-keeping system was maintained during her tenure at the State Department avoided FOIA. She maintained a private server, and all of her emails were housed outside the State Department server.
Right. And in effect, then, there's no agreed totality of what it is you're looking for. You might get a bunch of emails this time, but it doesn't mean there's a whole bunch, because basically she forwarded them to the United States government.
That's exactly right. And those emails were hand-selected by her attorneys, and the emails that were returned by her senior aides were also hand-selected by their attorneys. And as the judge pointed out, there is no assurances that the State Department has made or even can make at this point that those records that were returned by Secretary Clinton and her senior aides contain a complete set of her emails. And it's just like, imagine that you are spreading your set of documents amongst 10 file cabinets. You can't just search 3. You have to search all 10.
Right. That's basically what we mean by the record of Hillary Clinton at the State Department. Right. Is there's some things for which there's 3 photocopies, and there's some things for which there's 2 photocopies, and there's a whole bunch of stuff for which there are no photocopies. That's basically how it's worked out there.
Right, right. And so now the State Department has to go back and do what it was supposed to do 2 years ago, and search the state.gov email accounts for her senior aides.
What do you think we're likely to find in these Benghazi emails? You've asked for things relating to how Susan Rice wound up giving all that mumbo-jumbo on those Sunday shows about why it was all the fault of some video that none of those guys had ever seen.
Right. So that's actually a different case. This case would include those emails, but this actually is a little broader. It asks for all of her emails relating to the attacks. And they have until September 22nd to provide the court with an update.
Okay. Well, thanks for that, Ramona. If you look at the film about the Benghazi incident, what's fascinating about that is that there were people in town involved in that attack who seemed to be very well informed as to the ambassador's whereabouts that night. And it would be interesting to know whether the leakiness of Hillary's private server had anything to do with that. Ramona, thanks very much and good luck. And I'm glad you were able to find an obliging judge today. Sharks, jellyfish, and rip currents aren't the only things you have to fear at the beach. Now beachgoers in Spain have to worry about migrants washing ashore too. Up next, we'll ask why Europe's leaders won't treat migrants like the crisis they are. And Tucker will be here for a chat with Micro. All that coming up. Take a look at this. This is footage captured by bathers at a Spanish beach showing a dinghy full of African migrants washing up on shore, and the migrants scramble like the Yank troops landing at Normandy. If you can imagine Omaha Beach full of topless women instead of German soldiers when they arrived there. And then they quickly head for the hills before any police can arrive to detain them. And this dinghy represents just a tiny portion of almost 10,000 migrants who have entered Spain this year to claim asylum. Do you think those people are going to be sent back home anytime soon? Don't bet on it. Douglas Murray is the author of The Strange Death Death of Europe, which Tucker recommended a few weeks ago, and I can recommend too. It's a terrific and profound book, and Douglas joins us now. Douglas, this is really some kind of symbolic metaphor for Europe, isn't it? People lie, life's a beach, and then the people who are going to kill your civilization wash up on it.
Yes, exactly. It's an amazing just picture of where we are in Europe now. And this is just one beach in Spain, but 10 times the number of people who come into Spain this year have arrived in Italy with very little international note. But, you know, the people who rule us here in Europe, Angela Merkel, the European Commission, and pretty much the entire political class, would have us believe that those people you just saw landing on that beach in Spain are all, you know, PhD candidates and electricians and engineers and doctors just racing into Europe to try to give their all. And some of us don't think that is the case.
No, you've actually been to some of these other refugee centres, points of entry, as it were, in the Greek islands and so forth. From the look of that beach, it doesn't look as if there's a lot of scrutiny, as if Europe's authorities are there to process those people. As I say, you pick your way among the bikinis, and you're in Europe to stay.
Yeah, and you know, for the people on the beach, it's a bit of a bummer, you know, a bit of a distraction during the day. They're trying to work on their tan, and maybe it's just another boat, and then another one after that, and another one after that, and it's always someone else's problem. But, you know, at the very best, these people are going to work their way up north. They're going to work for criminal gangs, all run by people from their countries of origin. It's a horrible, hellish story from here on in. And just everybody in Europe seems to think they can just keep passing this buck. And eventually someone has to pay for this. You know, and I think our entire society ends up paying for this.
Now, we're told that these people are fleeing civil war in Syria or failed states like Libya. I spent a couple of days in a German refugee house with some very agreeable pot-smoking Gambians who were pretending to the German authorities that they were Syrians. You know as well as I do, there's very few similarities between West Africans and Arabs from Syria, but everyone had agreed to pretend that these Gambians were Syrian. These people aren't fleeing civil war. These ones who washed ashore in Spain are economic migrants.
No. Yeah, I mean, they're fleeing the brutal civil war in Morocco. If you're a European commissioner, you know that's the lie you'd have to push on this one. Basically, these are sub-Saharan Africans moving into Europe for a better life. I mean, sure, it's no doubt about it. Even a life working for a gang in Spain is better than a life in parts of or almost all of sub-Saharan Africa. But the question that Europe has is, how many of these boatloads do we take on before we ourselves capsize? And this is the question I cannot get any European leaders to address. They just want to keep ignoring it, keep on thinking, oh, it's just another boat, just another beach.
Right. Now, in your book, you devote quite some time to a famous French novel by Monsieur Raspail called The Camp of the Saints. Not a Spanish beach, it's a French beach. And on this French beach, a ship full of the world's refugees comes ashore and basically collapses the French state. He wrote this novel, Monsieur Raspail did, in, I think, 1971-72. Are we actually seeing that scenario playing out simply incrementally with smaller boats week by week?
That's right. That novel, The Camp of the Saints, is a horrible, sort of apocalyptic novel. Predicted, you know, 1 million people arriving. And more than 1 million people arrived in 2015 alone. So, yes, I mean, this horrible apocalyptic novel turned out to have understated the size of the apocalypse. And, yes, I mean, this is just a drip, as I say. Every day, thousands of people make their way to Italy. And, by the way, they're not just landing on the beaches in Italy, they're picked up by NGOs working with, in some cases, the criminal smuggling gangs, and they do the second part of the work for them. They bring them into Europe. This is, in my mind, insanity on a continent-wide scale.
Yeah, you're absolutely right about that, Douglas. Thanks very much. In fact, if you think it's bad coming on that dinghy, as Douglas says, the NGOs will actually meet some of these boats 200 yards off the Libyan coast and actually ferry you to Europe in some comfort.
That's right.
A sanctioned student group at the University of Minnesota has a very important rule. No white people allowed. Up next, we'll talk to a Minneapolis journalist who says racially segregated groups are a grand idea. That's next on Tucker Carlson Tonight. Yes, it's time for campus craziness. The University of Minnesota has a student group with one rule: no white people, period. On its website, the group Tongues Untied touted itself as a safe space targeted exclusively at LGBTQIA and or same gender-loving people of color. For those of you who speak English instead of progressive, that means the group is for non-white gay and transgender people and no one else. Since the story broke, the group has updated its webpage to remove its warning that whites should stay away, but Mike Mullen wrote about the controversy for City Pages, and his take was that white people should shut up and stop whining. Mike Mullen joins us now. Thanks for coming on, Mike. You basically think this is the white guys, the alt-right white, as you call them, at campus reform making a fuss about nothing.
Right. I would say that this doesn't really bother me, and I'm surprised that it bothers them. If you saw the original message on the website, it said to allies of this group, they would ask that you please give them some privacy to have their meeting alone. I don't think that the people at Campus Reform or the people who have acted like they're outraged at this are actually the allies that they're referring to.
You described the fellow at Campus Reform who brought this up, Mitchell Gunter. You said he's a notably white man from South Carolina. What do you mean by a notably white man?
I meant a joke.
Yeah. What kind of? What's the joke there? I mean, you seem notably white to me. Is that a joke? You're a notably white man from Minnesota.
Right, and I'm not outraged that I'm not allowed to go to a group for black and queer gay people. That doesn't hurt me. The fact that
but just to go on with this compartmentalization, this is for LGBTQIA people of color and LGBTQIA indigenous people. I always lose it after the Q. What do the I and A stand for in that?
Honestly, I'm not sure. I assume it's indigenous and something. I don't know.
Wrong. It's intersex and asexual. So I just wanted to ask you here, why do you think that an indigenous trans woman has more in common with an African American asexual than with a white trans woman? Because that's what this group is saying.
No, they're saying that if those people think they have more in common and want to get in a room with each other and have a conversation about, I guess, their race or their sexuality, they would be allowed to do that.
No, they've actually formed. You couldn't, for example, form a group for notably white people, such as yourself and the fella from South Carolina, Mitchell Gunter, and you have a group for notably white people who are notably heterosexual. But you can have a group that says a white trans woman is excluded from this group, but an African American asexual can be a member of the group. Are you happy with this? Because this is like Mad Libs, where you just toss the identity group confetti in the air and it all comes down and you piece it together any which way, except that if you belong to certain core identities, you're excluded. You think this makes any sense for trans people or asexual people or intersex people?
What I would point out is that whenever there's outrage about these kind of groups and their supposed segregation or discrimination, it's never actually coming from that trans white woman. She probably understands why they would want to be alone. It's coming from people like you, I guess, who they're asking to leave them alone.
Yeah, and the criticism of people like me, who are notably white, is coming from other notably white people like you. Don't you think that's what's weird, too? That there's like agonized, notably white progressive liberals like you getting upset about notably white... by the way, why do you call campus reform alt-right whites? What's that mean?
It means that if you look at their coverage, mostly what they do is they look for things like this where they can act outraged about the fact that that it's actually white, straight people, usually men, who are the ones who are truly being discriminated against, which is, to me, I guess, falls short.
We're talking here about why white transgender women can't go, or white intersex women can't, or men, or both, can't go to this group.
Do you have a lot of them contacting you and saying that they're outraged that this?
No, I'm not actually persuaded. I'm not actually persuaded that that intersex. I'm not actually persuaded that indigenous intersex persons are a measurable demographic. I'm asking you, as a notably white person yourself, don't you think this multiplicity of identity group balkanization, splitting into ever more micro and in fact barely detectable groups, isn't quite absurd?
No, I don't think it's absurd. I mean, you're right. This is a very small group. As far as I can tell, there are maybe 10 people in it. And the fact that it exists doesn't bother me, and I didn't even know it existed until a couple weeks ago when people who had never heard of it before also became outraged by it. Its existence has not done anything to them or to you.
What do you think of Martin Luther King, who thought that one day we could be judged on the content of our character rather than the colour of our skin? Now we've ended up with a world in which the colour of your skin apparently trumps whether you're a transgender person or whether you're a lesbian, because the fact that the colour of lesbian you are is more important.
I think Martin Luther King is great, and I assume if he tried to go to one of these meetings, they would let him in.
I don't think so. Unless he's an African-American asexual. And again, we don't know that. Thank you very much. That's the notably white Mike Mullen. Thanks for coming on the show, Mike. Speaking to us from Minnesota, we'll let you know. And speaking of safe spaces for gay people, by the way, the City of London has an exciting new job, Gayness Inspector. And if you've been to London recently, you'll know that's quite a demanding job. Thanks to rising real estate prices and the growing popularity of dating apps, London has lost more than half its gay bars in the past decade. And that, in the eyes of Mayor Sadiq Khan, is a crisis that must be remedied. So the city has announced that a certain commercial development will only be approved if the final plan includes a new gay bar. And I hope they put it next to Mayor Khan's favourite mosque, just to add to the vibrancy of diversity. To make sure this bar isn't just a normal bar, the mayor's office will, according to The Guardian, to send an inspector to make sure it's gay enough. Because don't you hate it when you go to a gay bar and it's just like, you know, sotto voce gay, it's not really flamboyantly gay? Anyway, what does gay enough for Mayor Khan, London's first Muslim mayor, mean? We're afraid to ask. And so are half the imams in the East End. After the break, Tucker will be back for a chat with Mike Rowe, plus Scandal star Josh Malina, who went on a deranged Twitter rant against Trump voters. We'll add his star to our Hollywood Walk of Shame. All to come on Tucker Carlson Tonight. Tucker's only doing one segment a night these days, so here's a recent conversation he had with Mike Rowe.
Mike Rowe, great to see you.
Nice to see you.
So, emojis.
Yeah.
There is a brand new suite, assortment of emojis, a new typeface of emojis.
Yeah.
Teenagers across America are excited. I sense this is bad. I can't articulate why. What do you think?
Let's see. Well, as I understand ancient history, I think we started with hieroglyphics.
Yes. Cuneiform.
It appears as though we may have gone full circle. I mean,
that's true.
Look, I mean, I don't know how much righteous indignation we can whip up over the emojis, but I am troubled by their quantity. I mean, there are hundreds of these things.
Yes.
And they seem to have assumed every possible expression, every nuance of feeling seems to now be accessible in this endless pile of emojis. And I didn't know, A, there was that many, emotions in the human condition. But now we have to choose which one to use to express ourselves and to whom and when. So I'm not sure we've simplified things at all.
It does seem like they're bypassing language. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
We have the biggest language in the history of language, English.
Yeah.
More words than any other language ever had. Why are people choosing not to use it?
I think, again, just a theory, but I think this general assault on conventional norms of work, which we've talked about ad nauseum before, has kind of bled over. It's unnerving. It's disconcerting to look down and see Velcro when you expect laces.
Yes.
And I don't know if it's a harbinger of the end of days, but it is troubling because you have to ask, regarding emojis, what is next? I mean, just grunts? Interpretive dance? I mean, right, look, we don't...
Dark.
Grown people are now communicating with texts that say, you are great, but great is GR8. Right? I mean, it's like the language and mnemonics. We're all hooked on phonics again with now the little emoji things combined. I don't know what's happening, but if you want me to make a serious point, what about this? What if this slow degradation of the language is actually a component of the demise of soft skills? And
what are soft skills?
Soft skills are those things that allow you not to take a phone call during a job interview, to maybe pull your pants up, tuck your shirt in, show up on time. The basic things that many employers bemoan today that seem to be conspicuously lacking in much of the, what you call the employable people looking for jobs, right? They're not using their words to a degree that's making people excited about hiring them. And that ultimately is why the emojis got to go with the Velcro shoes.
How big a part of employment is that?
Well, look, the people I talk with who are really trying to close the skills gap in their own part of the world, they say it's the most critical. The most critical thing that nobody talks about is passing the drug test. Right?
That's huge.
That's half, more than half gone. But the thing that we often talk about with the skills gap is the lack of skill, obviously. But then we discuss the lack of will that really fuels it, but it's also the lack of soft skills. People just don't know how to interview. They don't know what to say. They don't know. It's basic, but the erosion of that which is basic has to be germane to whatever it is we think we're talking about right now.
If you could give job, and I know you do this, but if you could give job advice to someone seeking a job at the lower end, just starting out, what kinds of counsel would you give?
I would say, if you can, put yourself in the chair of the person considering hiring you and say to them exactly what you would want to hear if you were them. Hi, it's great to be here. Here's the deal. I will be early every day. I will stay late every day. I will ask you what I can do every day to make your life simpler. If there's a difficult task, I will volunteer to do it. I will do so cheerfully. And 2 years from now, I'm going to be sitting where you are. If somebody said that to me, I'd be like,
are you kidding?
I'm not checking your references. I don't care. I'll see you tomorrow.
Great.
What happened?
No drug test necessary. You're hired.
Right. And then I give him a little smiley face and tell him to get out.
Micro, thank you.
Sure.
Micro on, quote, people who don't know how to interview and don't know what to say. I think that's Tucker's coded vacation message to his guest host. Coming up, someone called actress Ashley Judd a sweetheart, so she delivered a lengthy screed on Facebook.
And then when I was setting my things out, he said, hey, nice dress. I didn't hear him saying anything about the attire of any of the other folks.
After the break, we're going to add Ashley to the Hollywood Walk of Shame. That's next. It's time for the Hollywood Walk of Shame, where we showcase the most appalling behavior of America's decadent celebrity class. When we were children, we were taught that it was nice to compliment people, but no more. Actress Ashley Judd complained for almost 2.5 minutes on Facebook after an airport worker called her a sweetheart.
was coming through security, and a guy said, "Hey, sweetheart," and I said, "I'm not your sweetheart, I am your client." So I was already setting the boundary. And then when I was setting my things out, he said, "Hey, nice dress." Guess what happened next? He touched me. I didn't see him touch anybody else. And I turned around and I said, that was unnecessary. By the time, you know, my skin is burning, my feet are burning, it's so hard to continue to set these boundaries. Then for good measure, he just said one more time, "Have a good day, sweetheart." And this is the kind of thing to me that happens, which I categorize as everyday sexism.
Yeah, she's a sweetheart. North Korea said earlier today, "We will mercilessly wipe out provocateurs." And that's what Ashley Judd seems determined to do with airport workers. Radio host Dana Lash joins us. Dana, there's a lot to worry about in the world today, but this everyday sexism is the crisis afflicting us, according to Ashley Judd.
Yes, we have everyday lunacy, Mark, and it's so good to see you and be with you tonight. You said that she whined about this for 2.5 minutes on Facebook. That's about 1 minute and 30 seconds longer than most attention spans for people who watch streaming videos online. Right. There's nothing wrong with somebody paid her a compliment. Can you imagine if someone would have paid her an insult? Now that would have been something to live stream about.
Yeah, I don't know what we're meant to do now, because if you can't say, "Oh, have you changed your hair? That's a very nice hairstyle." If you can't say, "That's a lovely outfit you're wearing today," the normal social ebb and flow becomes there's